Well,
Afternoon, Ron.
good afternoon, Neil. Welcome to
Don't
the
call me that.
Preston Past Players 1860 Club interview discussion.
Pleasure.
Neil, you and I played a lot together and against, but I want to focus on your cricket background because your personal background's a bit sordid, so I want to talk about cricket. Originally from Ballarat, you were selected in an Australian under-19 team which toured New Zealand in about 1960 something or other.
68, I think it was.
Can you tell us about that experience as a young fella?
It was either 67, 8 or 8, 9. We went for 6 weeks to New Zealand, played all around New Zealand, started in Auckland and went right down to the bottom, Invercargill, which is the coldest place I've ever been to in my life. And we all froze. Came back and played, so I had my 18th birthday in Rotorua, there you go. Our last game was a sort of unofficial test in Christchurch, I think it was.
Did you have any success?
So, I was in that side, so we played some. They had some very notable players then, Headley Howarth.
Who were the Australian players you played with? Of any
David
note?
Crowe was our captain, 6'4"
Played for Melbourne.
Melbourne player who played a couple of games for Melbourne and then broke down with the back, opening bowler. Never played again, basically. There were several who got in the state squads around the various places. Peter Ryan,
Yeah.
who you know.
Yeah, Fitzroy. Yep.
Fitzroy, played with Queensland for a few years.
Yes.
That was about it.
What was your best score on that tour?
I've got no idea. Somewhere between 50 and 100, I suppose. I didn't make 100. I think only one of us made 100 on the tour. That was Ralston Tiedemann.
So you got
The
some
vice
runs,
captain.
and you had a great
Yeah.
time.
Well, I had a great time, yes. Too good a time, unfortunately.
Anyway, you came to Melbourne from Ballarat, and you undertook an arts teaching degree at Monash, ultimately
Close enough, yeah.
getting a Master of Arts. So,
No, Master of Education. It was a few years later.
my apologies, Master of Education. So tell us about your time at Monash, or how did it transpire that you left Ballarat to come to the big smoke?
Well, in those days, as you would remember, the young ones wouldn't know now, Victoria, as far as cricket was concerned, was all zoned, just like the football. It's like back in those days, Ballarat was zoned, footballers were zoned to St Kilda, for example. Bendigo was Carlton. We were in 3 or 4 zones country Victoria, and so coming from the west I was zoned to North Melbourne, Footscray, Essendon and Collingwood, and they all wanted me to come down and play, but I didn't want to play until after I'd finished my Year 12 exams. And North Melbourne was the most impressive, so I ended up at North Melbourne.
Okay. And you had 12 happy years at North Melbourne.
12 great years at North, yep.
What were the highlights? You played with Sadiq Mohammed, you played with Ian Chappell, you played with Paul Sheehan.
Yes, Paul.
Some wonderful players.
Rowan Canai, of course.
Rowan, yes.
Chappell, yeah, Sadiq, Paul. I could tell you some funny stories there, but I better not.
Rod Evans, a great Essendon man.
Yes, a great Essendon man. Better North Melbourne man, though. Little story there. Ron was responsible for me getting engaged.
Oh, tell us
I
about
don't
that.
know whether
Yeah.
I was
Keep it short, but
going out with a girl called Terry for a few years, and he got sick of me doing nothing. So one night at North Melbourne, I think it was, he said to me, "Here, when we're having a drink, you are going to a certain restaurant in Lygon Street, Carlton. You're taking Terry, and you're going to ask her to marry you.
wow,
There's $20 on the bill and a bottle of wine already paid for."
wow.
So the dutiful student I was, I did.
Just to claim the 20 bucks.
So there's a story about the great man Ron.
And I believe Terry passed away recently.
Yes, unfortunately.
Anyway,
yeah.
yeah. So anyway, you were after 12 years at North, you were approached by Q, and you were appointed Captain-Coach of Q in
Yes,
sub-district.
yeah. Well, I was
5
coming
years.
up 30 then, and I really wanted to captain North Melbourne in my own right. And I was getting right into coaching with the VCA and the ACB. For one reason or another, which we don't need to go into here, I didn't get the captaincy at North Melbourne. Q approached me, so that's how I went to Q.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that. What and how did you get involved in writing cricket coaching manuals and so forth at VCA?
Well,
Victoria.
Frank Tyson, another great man, had become director of the new, first I think he was, director of coaching, that title, and the state coach. And he and John Harris and myself, the three of us, they actually wrote a cricket coach's manual. And it was my job to put them into practice at training to see if all of our theories and whatever actually worked in practice. So that's how the three of us started the Cricket Coaches Association of Victoria.
Ah.
And on that original committee, another bloke, I think Jack Rose was on the original, we got him in on the original committee, and Arthur Marks. They were the five of us, I think from memory, who started the Cricket Coaches Association.
Yeah, it was a good contribution. Anyway, after 5 years of moderate success at Q, you made the finals, I think, a few years in that 5-year period.
I would argue that Q was the strongest club in the competition when I left. The reason being is that when I went there, they hadn't been in the finals in any grade, I think, or maybe one. Just our last 3 years, 4 sides, 3 years, that's 12 teams. 11 out of the 12 teams made the finals, and we won, I stand to be corrected here, but probably 7 or 8 premierships in those last 3 years I was there.
How many first 11?
None.
Oh, okay.
No premierships in the first 11.
Right.
But I would argue that made us the most powerful club in the competition.
So you obviously improved the depth of talent and through the club. Some wonderful people at Q, and Jack Carr
especially. He was
Kenny Bray.
Ken Bray, they were the two people mainly responsible, and John Ryan, whom you might remember, whom you would have played against.
Yeah, played South Melbourne.
South Melbourne, were responsible for getting me there. Yeah.
So how did you get to Doncaster after 5 years?
Towards the end of the 5th year, I was starting to feel it was time to move on. And at the end of the season, I got a phone call from, it might have been the president, who was Ralston Wood at Doncaster, out of the blue. I didn't know anyone there. Asked me if I'd be interested. I said I might be. Went and saw them, whatever, and they persuaded me to that would be a good move. So I went there on a 2-year deal. 1 or 2 days later, might have even been the same day that I said yes, I would go to Doncaster, I got another phone call from someone I didn't know, who was King Richard.
Yes.
Dick Norris.
Yes.
Asked me if I'd be interested in going there. And I had to say no, I'd already given my word to Doncaster, so that was the end of that.
Right.
So that was my first sort of things with Preston as well.
But you only then had the 1 year at Doncaster?
One year at Doncaster. During that year, Fitzroy were being kicked off the old Brunswick Street Oval, whatever. It's long stories, but I had a 2-year deal and wanted to stay, but, cut the story short, whichever one became president, the old Fitzroy president or Ralston Wood. I wanted to stay if Ralston remained president, which he should have. But I was not prepared to go anywhere near the other one. As it turned out, the other one became president for 1 year, so I was out of there.
And hence you came to Preston.
So Richard must have got whiff of what was going on there.
Yeah.
And rang me again out of the blue and said, if you're not at Doncaster, we want you over here. So that's how I went there.
Well, that was fortunate for Preston, because there's no doubt you had a big impact on Preston in those 5 years, because we made finals in every year. I'm talking firsts, and I think the seconds had quite a bit of success as well.
Won several premierships.
Tell us about your thoughts of Preston compared to the other 4 other sub-district clubs that you've been with. How do you compare Preston, the culture?
At the start, I would say the first year or so, I wasn't particularly comfortable at Preston. I'm referring to the physical surrounds here now. For some reason, me and the Preston Oval, didn't get along all that well. So it took me a couple of years to really get used to and enjoy playing on the oval.
Yeah,
just some of those things. You like some ovals better than others and all that sort of thing. So, but as far as the players are concerned, I think it was more a culture shock for a lot of those blokes when they had to put up with my training methods and levels of expectation and whatever. But I would say that I would regard Preston and all the boys I coached there as my home of 15 or whatever it is years of sub-district cricket.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
There's no doubt, as a batsman, the grass on the outfield made it very difficult to keep the ball on the ground and score fluently and quickly. You had to hit the ball in the air to score. I can understand what you say about not feeling comfortable after coming from Kew, where you could snick 4 and you could defend.
Never snicked the ball on.
Sorry. You could push a 4 at Kew.
No, you couldn't. In fact, it was probably slower than Preston, but there are some grounds you just, for some no apparent reason, feel very comfortable on, and others you don't. A couple of others. Altona, the couple of times I played out there, big open spaces like big paddocks, couldn't warm to that sort of place at all. So,
give us your recollection of the finals that you were involved in. We lost the semi-final at Port after losing Johnny Berrickrey and Jeremy Lloyds, 2 key players from the side. We lost that semi out at Port. Do you want to talk about that game a bit? Yeah,
well, John had been the captain coach for the couple of years before and stayed on, who was a fine bowler, probably as good as there was in subbies at that time. We didn't have much depth in that first year. We had no depth at all, in fact.
This is pre-Populi too, wasn't
it?
Yeah.
And that's coming from the year before, where I think from memory you'd only won 2 games for the year or something like that. But we made the 4. We were 4th, we must have been, because Port was on top, undefeated all year.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if we were to win, John was going to have to play a big part of that, because he was the main bowler and he did his calf the week before, and so that sort of finished our real chance of getting over the top undefeated side. So
made 130, Gus top score with 50.
Something like that.
And that's the current president, Stephen Wilson.
Yeah.
And then
the next year we played in the final Ivanhoe, I think it was.
Yeah.
Ivanhoe. And I wasn't too upset when we got defeated that weekend because they'd made about 260 odd or something like that on the Saturday, which I thought was very gettable. At Ivanhoe it was. But it rained all night, I remember, and 260 became like about 600, literally, and we had absolutely no hope of making that many with a ball that was like a rock and an outfield where it was impossible to hit the ball or whatever. So,
well, at Ivanhoe, having played there myself for many years, on a dark day with no side screens, all you had to do was bowl full length out of the pine trees, and you couldn't see the ball.
It was extremely
one end
difficult. So, again, whilst I was pretty crook on things, I had to be realistic and realise that we had no chance of winning that game. Therefore, that didn't worry me too much.